So, again, I'm talking about Louise Hay's book, which is 40 years old this week. Or I don't know about this week, this year. And for anybody who doesn't know, Louise Hay is the woman who started Hay House Publishing, which does a lot of transpersonal, self-help, existential kind of publishing. Her philosophy was very Californian. It was probably considered super new agey back in 1984. And today, there have been, over that 40 years, so many other people that have come out and talked about the law of attraction, affirmations, gratitude. And if you're into healing, if you've taken any kind of a healing journey, you absolutely know about a lot of the things that she talks about. And certainly as a therapist, these are things that I teach constantly. So if you're just joining us, feel free to just kind of hang out, listen to the discussion. And I'm talking about Louise Hay's You Can Heal Your Life. I also would encourage you, if you have any kind of a chronic health condition, this book could change your life. I have a very interesting story to tell too as I get further into it, because a lot of these concepts can be hard to hold on to if it's the first time you're hearing about them. And yet I would say that it's really important to be open to the possibility, if that makes sense. Now I'm going to start with literally the very first thing she says. Page 1, chapter 1, line 1. What we think about ourselves becomes the truth about ourselves. And this idea about a self-fulfilling prophecy is really where that's rooted, right? Now, she's not unique in talking about that. A self-fulfilling prophecy has been talked about for eons. Shakespeare used it in his work. And it was, hey Stacy, and it was hypothesized by philosophers in before Christ was born, right, in the BCE era. So I really want to, as a matter of fact, I would suggest, if you're serious about if you're hanging out because you have a real curiosity, grab a pencil and paper. Or sit in front of a keyboard, whether it's a laptop or a computer or something, especially if you don't have the book. Now, if you have the book, you can just follow along with me. And if you read the ebook, I don't know what those pages are. I'm giving you the pages in a paperback book. So, chapter 1, page 1, what we think about ourselves becomes the truth for ourselves. And hey, Mark, glad you're here, by the way. Stacy, same for you. This idea that, and we've all heard the stories of the kid who is browbeaten by, hey Bella, so glad you're here. About the kid who's browbeaten by a parent. You're a shit-ass kid, you're nothing, you're never going to amount to anything. And sure enough, that becomes what the kid believes about himself, because after all, who loves you more, who knows more than your parents? That's what the kid believes about themselves, and that's the way they behave. That's the way they engage with the world, and that's who they become. Now, some people do just the opposite, right? Some people say, screw you, I'm going to prove you wrong. And they do prove them wrong. That's who they become. Now, it's not quite as black and white as this, as I'm sure you can imagine, but it's absolutely the foundation of this. When I was 14, maybe 15, my mother said to me, you know, your sister may be beautiful, but you are going to be interesting. Hello, Tin. And I'm like, who the hell wants to be interesting? Like, oh my God, my own mother doesn't think that I can be beautiful. And so I gave up trying. I literally gave up trying. And when men told me I was beautiful, I didn't believe them. I thought they just wanted, you know what? I didn't believe them. It took me years, I would say decades, to get to a point where I started to believe that I could be beautiful. Not understanding that beautiful was objective, certainly back then when I was a young kid, and certainly did not understand that my mother coveted interesting. Because to my mom, interesting was far more valuable than beauty. She believed, she was kind of grew up in Marilyn Monroe's time, and she believed that beautiful women were a dime a dozen. But to be interesting, to be able to hold a conversation, that's where the real value lay. But I didn't know that when I was a teenager. And so I took those words that she gave me, and they formed the shape of what I believed about myself. And so it's really because of all of that, it is critical to become aware of what you believe about yourself. And I would tell you that this is an ongoing process, because not all these things we believe are sitting right there on the surface for us to be aware of. Sometimes they come out in really interesting ways, and I have some stories about that. She goes on to say on page 1 that when we find harmony and balance in our life, when we create peace and harmony and balance in our minds, we find it in our life. And that's a little Marie Kondo, right? That's a little Marie Kondo in the sense that when she says when you create peace, harmony, and balance in your environment, it becomes your mind. And there's absolutely symbiotic energy between those two things. So Louise Hay says this in 1984. Marie Kondo comes out in 2010 or whenever that was and says it about the environment. It's the same stuff. And I said this before, when you read enough self-help books, what you'll come to understand is that they all kind of say the same thing. It's just they say it in a different way. And if you listen, they say the same things that all the great sages and philosophers and religious teachers have said all this time. 100%, Mark. Your reactions change as well. So you find it in your lives, which means not only out there, but in here, right? You're not reacting the way that you would react if you are still sitting in anger and angst, right? Going on to page 2. Now I'm just going to read the headlines because these are all ideas that she postulates, and then she spends a little bit of time thinking about them, explaining it. But when I say a little bit of time, 1 or 2 paragraphs is all. But each thought is individually important. So as I say it, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to ask. The universe, meaning God or the universe or the energy outside or Mother Nature or whomever, whatever energy you believe in, the universe totally supports us in every thought we choose to think and believe, regardless of what it is. Right? And you know, I find this so interesting. this is a point that I think people really miss, because it actually says this in the Bible. Neil Donald Walsh says this in Conversations with God. We talk about the universe supporting you in every thought. And again, if you think it, it will be true, right? If you can create it with your own energy. And that's the manifestation element, right? The universe totally supports us in every thought we choose to think and believe. That's manifestation. And so if you have any kind of belief in some external source, it's really important to understand that it's not the source's job to judge, convince you otherwise, lead you, direct you. It's the source's job to support you. So what are you asking the source to support? And a lot of it is subconscious. Remember, the source doesn't need your verbiage. When we pray, when we meditate, we're not using words. We're just thinking it. And especially for people who pray, you believe that the source hears you. So the source hears your thought and supports your thought. I'll never forget, many years ago, I was in a Bible study, and somebody was asking about the phrase in the Bible, ask and you shall receive. And they were talking about, and by the way, if you're just joining me, this is not a Bible study. I'm just using this as an example. But they say, ask and you shall receive. But the caveat is you must believe that you'll receive. If you don't believe it, that thought becomes the overpowering thought. You can ask, but then the core belief is, what good is it going to do? God never answers my prayers. The universe doesn't care. Or whatever that story is, that narrative is in your mind, right? So when it comes to manifestation, the same thing is true. You have to believe that the thing you are attempting to manifest is possible. It won't work otherwise, because that negative belief is there whether you're bringing it into your consciousness or not. And the source knows what's in the subconscious, right? Because it's part of that. Does it make sense? The next heading is the universe never criticizes or judges us. Again, that's not the job of the universe. The job of the universe is to support us, to pave the way for the decisions that we make for ourselves. The next thing I'm going to talk about is something that I literally talk to every single counseling client that I've ever had. Most of us have foolish ideas about who we are and many, many rigid rules about how life ought to be lived, which is just a nice way of saying we all have a gazillion shoulds planted in our brain. And those shoulds guide so much of what we do, right? Now, she talks about this later, and I'll get into it. There's a very quick fix for that. But it's literally imperative for you to understand that if you're human and you were raised in a human environment, you have embedded a list of embedded shoulds in your mind. They're there. Now, some of us have lists that are much longer than others. Some of us have a little bit more energy about those shoulds than others, but they're there. And every year I do a retreat twice. I do a retreat twice a year about self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-acceptance, and self-love. And we spend almost an entire day talking, maybe a day and a half, talking about self-awareness and trying to hear and find these shoulds that are buried in our psyche. Because believe it or not, they direct your behavior. They direct who you are. And it's not just your family of origin. It's social media, it's television advertising, it's neighbors and scout leaders and churches and billboards and magazines. There are shoulds everywhere. And a should ideally says, hey, think about living your life this way. But that's not how most of us hear it. Most of us hear it as you need to live your life this way or else. And think of how many times that's come from a pulpit or a parent or a grandmother, right? And when you identify those and you just twist the energy a little bit, which I'm going to talk about, everything changes. The next heading is when we are very little, and I'm only on page 3. When we are very little, we learn how to feel about ourselves and about life based on the reactions of the adults in our environment. And just think about that. Based on their reactions. If we do something and they appear happy, we're likely to do it again because of the whole operant conditioning element, right? Positive reinforcement. I do this, they laugh, and everybody's happy. I do this, they raise their voice, and now I'm scared. I don't want to do that again, right? So whether it's positive or negative, we learn how to feel about ourselves. I was telling somebody earlier today that I have this very vivid memory of an aunt coming up and hugging me and saying, oh, finally, I can feel your ribs. Because I'd slimmed down from my pubescent body. That has never left my mind. Oh, finally, I can feel your ribs. And the amount of people, and I know so many of you can relate to this, the amount of people who have walked up to me in my life and said, oh my God, you've lost so much weight, you look amazing, comes with so many shoulds. I look amazing when I'm thin. I get reactions when I'm thin. I get approval when I'm thin. So much so that I notice, especially with my stepmom, I notice when she doesn't say anything, I know that equals disapproval. How interesting is that? At this point in my life, I still attend and have an awareness of when she doesn't comment on how I look, and it's because she doesn't approve. And so all of these things just keep running around and swirling in your brain, right? And I think that it's really important to develop thanks, Stace. I think it's really important to develop an awareness of those things. The next bolded or headline is when we grow up, we have a tendency to recreate the emotional environment of our early home life. Isn't that interesting? Now, before you think about this too hard, try to take the judgment out of it. It's not good, bad, right, or wrong. What we grow up with is the thing that we equate to the word home. And when we grow up and we build a home, even if it's dysfunctional, that's the thing that we equate to. I worked with a client years ago who grew up in a super dysfunctional, unhealthy home. And time after time, this client chose a partner that was almost reenacting the same kind of dynamic that existed in their childhood. And then we started working together, and little by little, this client started to understand that what she grew up in wasn't healthy. And by the way, that can be really hard, right? It can be, if you don't know that, learning that can be a little traumatic. I mean, you know it hurts, but when you really understand that it's an unhealthy thing that hurts and that all along it could have been different, it hurts. So what happened was this person started making changes, and the relationships that they were in could no longer exist because they didn't feel good, and this person knew it. And what was left was all of this uncertainty, because the thing that they connected to, home, they knew they didn't want at that point, right? They knew that was unhealthy. And so we spent a whole nother section of time really defining what home could be like. And then that client set out to create that for themselves. And, you know, that was a journey, a really powerful journey, and very scary, by the way. I always miss that person a little bit, because watching the transformation was maybe one of the most gratifying things I experience as a therapist, is watching that person transform and start to recognize, like, not only did they personally transform from unhealthy to like birthing healthy things, but they started to create a new environment that supported healthy living. That was crazy rewarding. All right. She also goes on to say, this is never, ever, ever about blaming our parents. And I say this ad nauseum because when I talk about this, you know, at any time, literally any time I do a video, I have a couple viral videos about family and parenting. And anytime I do a video like this, I get a lot of comments about how I'm destroying the American family, how I'm contributing to the destruction of the American family. Because what I talk about is healing the pain, healing the holes that were left from the environment that you grew up in. Not blaming mom and dad. Mom and dad are products of their environment. And, you know, 80 years ago, we didn't talk about feelings. And so mom and dad did the best they could based on what they knew in that moment. And you might have been collateral damage, but it probably wasn't intentional. Very few people, I find, and I know a lot of people have things to say about this, but I find that very few people wake up in the morning with an intention to F up their kids. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't happen. What I'm saying is that it's kind of accidental. And inevitably there are people who say, but they should know better. And I'm like, how should they have known better? See, there's a should. There's the belief that if you're a parent, you're going to be healthy. Well, you shouldn't have kids if you're not healthy. Okay, but how many of those people know they're not healthy? Right? How many of those people are like that old client who it was simply normal? And then they had kids and they did what they knew, what they'd been exposed to. And I'm not excusing abuse. Please no. Hey, Amy. I'm not excusing abuse in any way, shape, or form. What I'm saying is that people are truly, a lot of people are truly ignorant in the purest definition of the word, of not knowing. They don't know. I'll never forget, I did a video about this. Hey Amy, this is tonight is my book discussion, so I'm not really chatting. I'm just talking about the book. And thank you very much. I worked with a guy, a couple actually, and he sat down in my office, and apparently in the car they'd had a fight, and she'd said, she said, let's go in and talk about it. And he said, don't you dare bring this up. And she was very obviously upset. So I asked her what was wrong, and she just blurted it out. And he stood up and used the ugliest combination of profanity and crudeness and belittlement on her. Like, you expletive, blah, 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 little expletive. I told you to keep your expletive mouth shut, blah, blah, blah. And then he stormed out. And I was like, holy smokes. And eventually he came back in, and I said, were you, like, do you think it's okay to talk like that? And he goes, what? What did I do wrong? And I said, that was verbal abuse. And then he lashed out at me. But when it was all said and done, when I got him to calm down, what I discovered was that was normal to him. When he grew up, that was normal. Like, how horrible for him that he grew up believing that that was normal. So I've had so many experiences similar to that as a therapist that I find I have less and less and less judgment over people who behave badly. And what I see is a lot of pain, dysfunction, and ignorance. There are exceptions, but that's a lot of what I see. Okay. She goes on to talk about believing in choosing your parents. Now, I'm not going to spend a ton of time talking about this, but I can at a later date if somebody... Hi, Janie. Thank you. If somebody wants to ask me at some point when I come back and do lives in August about that, it really kind of goes hand in hand with ideas or the philosophy of reincarnation. And it's always controversial because there's always somebody who says, I sure as hell would never have chosen my parents. And I don't think I can have both discussions tonight, especially since it's already 9:30. So put a pin in that. And if you have an interest in it, by the way, that's on page 4 because I'm only on page 4. If you have an interest in it, I really recommend digging into Brian Weiss and reading about reincarnation. It's like one of my favorite topics. Okay. She goes on to talk about the point of power is always in the present moment. And this is way before Eckhart Tolle started writing about the power of now. Janie, we are reading Louise Hay, You Can Heal Your Life. Super powerful book. 40 years old this year, but everything, it was kind of, I would tell you, Louise Hay was like one of the first self-help gurus. The point of power is always in the present moment. And I think this is powerful. All of the events you've experienced in your lifetime up to this moment have been created by your thoughts and beliefs that you've held in the past. However, that's your past. It's over. It's done with. You cannot change it. What is important in this moment is, what are you choosing to think right now? What are you choosing right now? Because that habitual thought that you had, if that's not been helping you get to where you want to go, you have to choose a new thought. You have to. And you know, if you have any interest in the power of thoughts, you can also read You Can Be Happy No Matter What. I think it's Richard Carlson, if I'm not mistaken. And I have a recommended reading list on my website. I'll try to put it on my link in bio if I can remember, but it's definitely on my website, which is linked in my link in bio. Okay. And that's why I want you to understand that the more you read, the more you dive into people who are telling you this. Louise Hay you may not relate to her, but maybe Richard Carlson you'll relate to. Shad Hemstetler, I think that's who it is. Both people have written books on that topic. So Shad Hemstetler or Richard Carlson. But the name of the book I'm thinking of is You Can Be Happy No Matter What. It's all about the thought. And I'm pretty sure Shad Hemstetler also has a YouTube channel. All right, so she's saying the only thing we are ever dealing with is a thought. And you know how I talked about this in the last book club when we talk about the problem isn't the problem. The problem is what we think about the problem. And that's what this says too, is no matter what the problem is, our experiences are just outer effects of inner thoughts. Hello, Leah. So think about this for just, it can be, yes, kind of self-talk, but it's really about perception, right? And that, not yet, Leah, this is my last live for a month. So it's about perception. It's about, so I've used this example before. Think about two people. There's a party planner who has a big event on Saturday, and there's a farmer with a crop that hasn't had a solid soaking rain in a month. And there's a massive storm coming. Now, the rain's going to come whether you want it to or not. And the only reason that these two people have different reactions to the storm that's coming is the way that they think about the storm. The party planner says, oh my gosh, the rain is going to ruin my party. And the farmer says, oh, thank goodness, my crop needs the rain. The rain is just the rain. The way that you think about the rain is what the rain is going to feel like to you. Please understand that, because it doesn't matter what it is. I've worked with clients who've gone through a divorce and literally suffered for a decade because their partner left them. And then I've worked with other people who, over the course of a year in their grief, they come to this place where they're like, you know what, I'm probably better off without him. I'm grateful that we were together and we had kids, and I'm ready to move on. The only difference is the thinking that happens as a result of that behavior, that experience. That's the only difference. You get to choose. In the retreat, I talk a lot about shifting your focus, right? Shifting your focus, and ways that you can shift your focus and really highlight something positive that you didn't see before. So we'll talk more about that, I hope, in a minute. She goes on to talk about, believe it or not, we do choose our thoughts. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of issue with this. And I think at the very core of the energy that moves through us, this is probably true. But I think consciously, like from a consciousness standpoint, it's really hard for a lot of people to wrap your head around that, especially if you suffer from anxiety or depression. I'm pretty sure I hear somebody out there going, that's bullshit. I would never want to think this stuff. I think it boils down to that the thought pops up. We can't handle, I don't think we can choose what thought pops up necessarily. But I absolutely believe that we can choose what thoughts to pay attention to. And thoughts, like every other form of energy, if it's not being used, it needs an outlet. So if you build a dam in front of this thought, it's going to go away. Like think about a mice in a maze. And if the researcher closes access to the food, and the mice keeps running into the gate, eventually they're going to give up and they're going to go look for a different avenue or a different outlet. And if you think about a thought that way, that I don't want to be thinking this. Like if, let's say, maybe this is a good example. I'm getting ready to jump on a plane in 48 hours. And I used to be the person that got on the plane, got up in the air, went over the ocean, and it would bounce, because I was always in economy in the back of the plane. And it would bounce. And I'd be like, don't crash, don't crash, don't crash. Oh God, don't crash, goodbye, children. I'd be all over that, right? I'd have to deep breathe. I carried Xanax with me because it was so bad. And then, literally, and I am not kidding you when I say this, it was literally one day, I'm walking off the plane, the pilot's standing there, and I can see a picture of his family. I said, cute kids. He goes, yeah, I'm pretty anxious to get home to them. And I'm like, that pilot wants to get home to his kids. That pilot is going to do whatever the hell he wants to do or he can do to get home to his kids. He doesn't want to die. Why am I afraid of dying? He doesn't want to die. And I've never been afraid since, literally. It was simply choosing a different thought to focus on. Because instead of focusing on this, I don't have control, I don't know how to fly the airplane, what if? Instead of focusing on that, I chose to focus on, he wants to go home. So whatever's happening, he's trying to get us down safely because he wants to go home. And the fear just evaporated, totally evaporated. And so that's a really, really solid example of you choose which thought you focus on, right? All right. Your thoughts changed the way I felt. Exactly. The thought changed the feeling. And that's important to know. So thanks for that contribution, Mark. She talks about the innermost belief of a lot of the people that she worked with was, I'm not good enough. Now, ironically, she worked with a ton of AIDS patients in the early 80s in Los Angeles, and is known for, I don't know if this is 100% accurate, but I want to say is known for contributing to the healing of AIDS patients. You might want to fact check me on that. And then she says, bottom of page 6, that she finds that resentment, and I want you to really think about this for a minute. Resentment, criticism, guilt, and fear cause more problems than anything else. So ask yourself, do I feel any resentment? Am I holding criticism? Do I have guilt? And what am I afraid of? And how are they impacting me? Now, what's great about the hard copy of this book is in the back, there's this whole list of things, of different fears or different problems that you can have physically, and then the fears or the feelings that are associated with that. And there's, I don't know, 25, 30 pages of this, from page 144 through, 60 pages of this. So that's great. So, roughly 60 pages of body ailments and the thoughts and feelings that are associated with those ailments based on her practice. The people that she's worked with over time. So, it's certainly worth looking into. So she talks about that. Then she talks about we can change our attitude toward the past. I had a long conversation with a client today who is grieving about meaning making. And if you're following my content, you know that right now I'm doing a series on happiness. And people ask me all the time, how can you be happy after everything that's happened to you? How can you be happy? After everything you've gone through, what do you hold on to? And what I would tell you is that this is another example, 100%, of where I choose to place my focus. What thoughts do I choose to focus on? Because all the thoughts come up, right? All the thoughts come up. Somebody, when I first told my story on TikTok, somebody commented, "Whoa, you're a black widow." I thought it was pretty funny, actually. But I could focus on that. I could focus on being cursed. I could focus on how deeply I've been betrayed or abandoned. I could focus on all of that. But what I tend to focus on is how grateful I am for all of those experiences, because they each led me to here, this moment in time, where at the very least I'm talking to 10 of you on average. And I know that I help a lot of people as a consequence of what I've learned from all those experiences. And so I think that's what she means here about your attitude about what's happened is incredibly instrumental in the way that you experience your past. And that's what David Kessler means when he's talking about meaning making as the 6th stage of grief. It's not exactly what he means, but it's in the camp of what he means. And then she writes this, and I need to memorize this because I I say a different version of it to myself occasionally, but listen to this. How foolish of us to punish ourselves in the present moment because somebody hurt us a long time ago. Just let that soak in. How foolish of us to punish ourselves, because nobody else is doing it, in the present moment because somebody else hurt us a long time ago. And I think about that person I worked with who went through a divorce, and they stayed mired in the muck for almost 10 years. For 10 years, she punished herself by living in the muck, by choosing the muck, because somebody hurt her that long ago. So I don't know what any of you are dealing with, but I want you to really ask yourself the question, why am I allowing that pain, that old pain? Why am I giving it any attention? I think that's a crazy important question. And then Louise goes on and gets into the proverbial forgiveness conversation. Now, hello, Bree, this absolutely changed. I'm trying to think when I read this. I may have heard it before I read the book, but every time I said it afterwards, it changed the way I managed a lot of the pain in my past. And so I'm going to really hold on to the example of forgiveness here, or the way that you engage in forgiveness here. And that is that I forgive you for not being who I needed you to be, or who I wanted you to be, because I see now that you couldn't, right? And then she goes on to say, I forgive you and I set you free. Now, that's never condoning behavior. It's not saying I forgive what you did to me. Listen carefully. It's not saying I forgive what you did to me. It's saying I forgive you for not seeing me. I forgive you for not knowing me. I forgive you for not being who I needed you to be. I forgive you for not being mature. I forgive you for this selfishness that prevented you from being what you needed, what I needed from you, right? And I think it's really important to hold on to an awareness of what that means, right? Oh boy. Can I get a moderator? And then she goes on to talk about all you need to do is be willing to forgive, right? That's all you need to do. Just be willing to forgive. Okay, thank you, Stacy. And then beautiful Louise Hay, she starts singing magic, right? She starts writing magic words, magic to me, because she starts talking about how critical it is to love yourself, to approve of yourself exactly as you are. Now, here's something else I know that there are some people that really need to hear this. if you and I are on a path and you fall and hurt yourself, hi Kathy, you fall and hurt yourself and you are now sitting on the path and I didn't really notice, or I'm so far ahead of you, and I turn around and realize you're not with me. And I'm like, hey, come here. Come up here, right? Come to me. How fast do you think you're going to get there? Are you really? I mean, you're probably not coming, right? And if you are going to try to come, you're really struggling to get there because you're hurt. In order for me to really join with you again, I have to come to you. We have to meet hurt people where they are. Try to remember that. We have to meet hurt people where they are. Now, when I tell you that self-love is really important, you're like, I just really don't like that part of myself. I can't really love myself. And what I'm going to say to you is you get your butt in gear and you go meet yourself right where you are. Approve. This isn't about good or bad, right or wrong. It's about go meet yourself where you are. No judgment, no criticism, no anger, no frustration, no shame. Meet yourself where you are. And that means that you must approve. And approve is about acceptance, right? She's using the word approval. I'm going to say accept where you are right now. Otherwise, you're just going to be miserable, right? Right now, just meet yourself where you are and let that be the starting point. I'm going to get really vulnerable with you for a minute. So I ran out to the mall yesterday, desperately seeking a new pair of Keds tennis shoes, and I wanted a particular pair, but I kind of got lost in Macy's. I was telling my subs last night that, hey Nick, that I walked through Macy's and it was like 1984. Like I felt like I was in a store in 1984. I came home and was like, I have pictures of me in these clothes. Anyway, I was shopping and I took some hangers and I put them on my arm, right? Just hung them on my arm. And today, I have blood blisters. I have old lady skin. I have old lady skin. I can't even put a hanger in my arm without old lady skin happening. So I love and accept. I love and accept everything, my body exactly the way it is. And by the way, old lady skin's probably super judgmental. So I'm going to take that back and just love myself exactly the way I am. That's where I am. Okay? Thanks, Nick. So she talks in this, Nick, we're doing a book discussion, so be serious. She talks about loving and approving of yourself, creating a place of safety, trusting, deserving, accepting. It organizes in your mind. It helps you create more loving relationships in your life. And maybe most importantly, when you start loving yourself, you will attract people into your life. That energy just shifts the vibration, the dimension, whatever it is you want to call it. It shifts just enough that you'll start attracting that back at you. Remember, and some of you may remember that I talk about the boomerang theory and about how all of the energy that we put out into the world comes back at us, right? So loving the self begins with never criticizing yourself for anything. Criticism, and here again, listen carefully, criticism locks us into the very pattern we are trying to change. Every time you hear that inner voice that's critical, you are locking yourself, you're literally locking the door, preventing change. That's really important. Understanding and being gentle, which is known as what? Compassion. Understanding, being gentle with ourselves helps us to move out of that. It opens the door. Understanding and gentleness, that's compassion. The criticism will lock the door. You want to be someplace different? Stop the criticism. Meet yourself where you are and start moving. Start being compassionate. Hey, babe, get up. It's okay. I'm here. I came to get you. I'll help you get out of here. Lean on my shoulder. Remember the girl, the me that was in or the person that you're hiking with or walking with? And they're sitting on the ground. What are you going to do with them? Stand over them and go, stop being a wimp and get up? Come on. That's not what you're going to say. You're going to be gentle and understanding. It's been over 45 minutes. I'm on page 9. Clouds, rational thoughts. Absolutely, Mark. Okay. I'm going to jump up to page 15, and she's talking about shoulds, and I'm going to really spend a minute on this because it's such a critical element, and it's pretty simple. I talked about shoulds and how they're expectations coming from outside. Shoulds will tell every therapist, so I'm telling you, listen to every single time you use the word should. Put it in a journal. Okay? And then ask yourself, what is the belief I'm shoulding? Why should I? What? And she has a whole bunch of examples here. I guess they're on the next page. Or there's someplace in here. Because my mother said so. Because I have to be perfect. Because that's what people want from me. Because that's what you do. That's how you get into heaven. Whatever it is. Write down the should, and then what is the belief that's associated with that. Now, in my course, I do a whole section on this too, because it's that important. Every time we use the word should, she goes on to talk about, we're essentially saying the word wrong. Either we are wrong, or we were wrong, or we're going to be wrong. And we need freedom of choice. Because choice is power. Choice empowers you. Shoulds disempower you. And so all you have to do is change the S to a C and start saying, I could. I talk about this a lot in the last couple of years. So I've been doing lives for over 4 years now. That's a lot. And in that 4 years, I've probably talked about this, and I have content about it. I've probably talked about it 24 times or more. Changing the S to a C changes the should to a could, and now you have a choice. And many of you will choose to follow through because it's something that's important to you. But another section of you or another population will start to decide, actually, I don't want to. Never did want to. I don't know why I'm doing that. It's not important to me. Right? And now you are empowered to make decisions for yourself. And that's really important. All right. She goes on to talk more about loving yourself. By the way, keep in mind that a lack of self-worth is another expression of not loving yourself. Right? If you love yourself, you're enough. Think of all the people you love. Here's my puzzle piece. Think of all the people you love. And how unworthy they are. Does that even fit together? What do you mean unworthy? They're so cool. They're so worthy. So if you love yourself, you're worthy. They go hand in hand. She talks a lot about mirror problems in the retreat. I work with mirrors. In the advanced retreat, I'm going to be really working with mirrors. Okay, limiting beliefs. Now, if you've done any cognitive behavioral therapy, you're going to know what a limiting belief is. A limiting belief is something that keeps you kind of locked in. Think about cement boots, that kind of thing. I'm not good enough, a lack of self-love, life is dangerous. And I think one of the things, and I'll share with you, again, this is a story I tell all the time, that, and I won't take up time to kind of give you the backdrop, but there was a time in my life when my kids were trying to do something nice for me, and I was being anal, and somebody said, "Geez, Mom, don't you trust us?" And I just blurted out, "No, I don't." And I'm like, huh, where did that come from? And that's a limiting belief I didn't even know I had. I don't trust people to take care of me, or at least at that point, I didn't trust people to take care of me, and I didn't know that belief sat there. But it was absolutely, in retrospect, at the core of a lot of my behavior. I used to blame it on learning from my mother that if you want something done right, do it yourself. But all that did was actually perpetuate and support this absence of trust. And so it's, that's why I said that this process of discovery is going to be a long process. It's not just you read one book and it all pops up and you work on it and you're good. The process of discovery that's where the peeling the onion piece kind of comes along. You're just going to keep peeling back some layers and working on them as you can. What are your core limiting beliefs? Not believing that, or feeling is, let's say, not trusting people limits a whole lot, because you always have to have control. You always have to be the one to take care of yourself. You won't let people take care of yourself. I look back at people in my life who said, "You never let me help." And which by the way is another thing. If there's somebody in your life that is on repeat with a phrase and you don't believe them, or you think it's their issue, I'm going to ask you to take a good hard look at that and ask yourself, is that true? Now, I probably would never have acknowledged that before I was a therapist. I wasn't open-minded enough to, I guess I didn't, that's what I say today. I thought I was really open-minded, but I guess I wasn't vulnerable enough to really accept that I had these defective beliefs that were guiding my behavior. Certainly before I went to grad school, I didn't have an acceptance of that. So, just another example. All right. On page 29, she starts to talk about blame. And I think it's so critical to understand you cannot change the past. Blame has no function here whatsoever. Blame is another way to keep you locked into a problem. Hence the client that had gone through a divorce. She blamed her husband for ruining her life, and she blamed him for 10 years. She stayed stuck in that misery for 10 years. The future is shaped by the way you think today. So if you let go of the blame and say, what am I going to do with this pain? How am I going to make it constructive? The world's open to you. The world is waiting. And then she goes back into another thing about choosing your parents and people in your life and why you're here. And she kind of gets into this little existential conversation. But I loved this because and again, if you are here a lot with me and if you pay attention to what I think, what my philosophies are about why we're here and what's the point. She says, we are all here to transcend our early limitations, whatever they were. We're here to recognize our own magnificence and divinity, no matter what they told you. You have your negative beliefs to overcome, and I have my negative beliefs to overcome. And so I think about all those people I've worked with through time who ask themselves why things happen. And all I'm going to say is, in all of those experiences and whatever you're going through right now, whatever it is, your soul, according to what Louise Hay is writing, and this certainly matches up with reincarnation literature, that might be a strong word, your soul is here to work out those limitations, to grow out of those limitations. And this thing that's happening to you right now, that's going to help you do it if you'll let it. She spends a ton of time, and I'm not going to have time to go much further into this tonight, but she spends a ton of time talking about resistance. Pay attention. She talks about checking the beliefs. Are they true? It feels true. How do I know it's not true if it feels true? And what about my feelings? She talks about continuing to try and remind you that when you were a child and you started walking, every time you stood up, you fell down. And if you had given up, if you really were a person who gives up, you never would be walking. None of us are born that way. None of us are born defeated. Remember that. Let's see. There are a number of really good exercises throughout the chapters in this book, and if you aren't taking my course and you want something to really sink your teeth into, this book would be a good thing to sink your teeth into. Let's see, what else do I have highlighted? If you've, let's see, I don't think anybody that I saw pop in has been at the retreat, but it's so interesting how many things in here are things that I talk about at the retreat or that I do at the retreat. And I'm not sure I understood when I first recommended, or when I first agreed to do this book. I didn't remember as much of it as I see, like just even the piece about accepting compliments. People with low self-esteem, low sense of self-worth find it incredibly hard to accept a compliment. Practice accepting compliments. Practice. Just say thank you. That's it. Just say thank you. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. And if somebody has the opinion that you have great hair, or you look nice today, or they love your house, or you're a great cook, or you're a hard worker, just say thank you. Don't diminish it. I hope that you've gotten a lot out of tonight, because this book is power punched with information. And I really only got into the first 30 pages. I truly want you to consider picking it up and using it as a workbook. I'm happy to answer questions. Come into my lives when I start back up again and answer or ask any questions that you have. Stacy, I'm so glad. Healing, all of the things that you need. Good, Bonnie. All of the things that you need are already here. They really are. You just have to learn how to use them. All of these tools. And this book is one of those tools. My course is one of those tools. TikTok videos are a tool. Your therapist is a tool. The books in the libraries are tools. And your thoughts are tools. Learn to use the tools you have. Because that's where healing comes from, is by using the tools.